Hello and welcome to the Procurement Podcast, brought to you by Beazley and our sponsors for this series, Amazon Business. This is your go-to podcast for all things procurement. If you're ready to move from being a tactical buyer to a strategic leader, you're in the right place. Tune in and together we can build a better bottom line. I'm Aaron McMillan, editor of Procurement Magazine and your host for this podcast series.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Procurement Magazine Podcast. I am your host and editor of Procurement Magazine, Aaron McMillan. Our guest today is a visionary leader and critical thinker who has spent over 25 years at the intersection of global commerce, high-stakes regulation and technical disruption. From his early days at Reuters to high-impact leadership roles at Tier 1 giants such as UBS, HSBC and GSK, he has mastered the art of managing complexity at scales ranging from $500 million to many billions in annual spend. Today, as the Chief Procurement Officer at Beazley, a mentor to the next generation of leaders, he continues to push the boundaries of how organizations leverage third-party partnerships to drive growth in an increasingly unpredictable AI-driven world. Please welcome to the Procurement Magazine Podcast, Hiten Parmar. Hi, Hiten. How's it going?
Hi, Aaron. Very well, very well. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Likewise. Well, tell me, I mean, reading your introduction there, you've had a very kind of storied career in procurement. Tell me, how did you get involved? Was this something you dreamed about doing when you were a kid? Or was thought about you'd like to lead digital transformations?
I'm not sure I knew what procurement was as a kid. When I really started was playing lots of sport and high pressuring moments of truth, as they say. And then within that, always seeing a picture and solving a problem. But always, so that's where it started, was problem solving, critical thinking, knowing how to partner and collaborate with others in an effective team. Different people bring different strengths to achieving the outcome you desire. That also led me into leveraging innovation and knowing, if you like, the discipline of how do I get 1% better? Yeah. And then adding up those percentages into something which is really significant as a change. And then knowing that in the heart of procurement and successful change is talent and people. And that combination of things really took me down the path of transforming businesses through the lens of third parties, which meant the business of procurement.
It's really interesting that you talk about playing sport a lot when you were younger. I mean, is that kind of competitiveness kind of translated into the kind of position you hold today? Do you still kind of hold that competitive edge now?
I think the polite way of saying is that I'm always looking for that extra. Yeah. And I think as you do all sorts of personality, character traits and, on leadership and where your mind goes, looking for that extra, looking around the corner, being curious is part of who I am. Being demanding is part of who I am. Wrapping that up within the glove of something that brings growth or value is part of who I am. So I learned all of those things, as they say, once you cross the white line, but also, the joy that it can bring of being an effective team in a locker room is something you don't forget.
Do you think that kind of drive, that desire, is kind of what separates you and has put you into these kind of countless leadership positions you've held, that you've kind of had the ambition that you've taken from your time playing sports to now where you are in leading these procurement operations?
Yeah, I think there's got to be some connection. When you talk to sort of leadership coaches and stuff, there's always an element of how do elite sportsmen go about stuff. I wasn't one of them, but the DNA of what success looks like and being stronger than the sum of the parts really does translate into the business environment. And when you're looking at the latest innovation to give you that 1%, then you start to intersect with technology. Yeah. And if that's your part of your natural curiosity about seeing what's around the corner and plotting, seeing that picture and plotting that path and executing that, it really lends itself very naturally.
I'll stop questioning you about sports, although I could talk about that all day. I think there's a really nice kind of link between those in leadership roles and that kind of, passion and desire which comes from those who play sport, whether it be as a kid or as they grow up. But you've built procurement for a number of companies. When you walk into an organization where the procurement foundation is either non-existent or is being torn apart, ready for something new to take its place, what is the very first brick you lay to ensure you ensure there's long-term value there?
Yeah, for me, this is one of the most fundamental questions, right? And it starts before I even say yes or start. Yeah, where I'm looking at trying to get under the skin of what's the business priority, what's the problem they need to solve, or the atmosphere they need to create, what's the opportunity in a sense. That's really where it starts. And then the first brick I look to lay is, once I understand those things, is the mindset and the atmosphere to drive the pace of change, because it's a business change. Modern procurement is about business change. You're baked into how a business functions, thinks, grows, de-risks itself, represents itself in the market and its brand. So you really need to take the pulse of the organization in that sense and gauge its appetite for the pace of change that you could really trigger. And that starts with the mindset and creating the right level of transparency around what's doable today and what's the opportunity of tomorrow. That's very much what I start with.
When you go about to, install that transparency, what does that look like these days? I mean, people talk a lot about being a transparent operation, but for you, what does that transparency look like, and how do we achieve that?
There's two levels to that. There's what I call the inward lens, which is how successful is procurement to change gears and be agile and enable that activity. But often that's where the energy gets distracted, because the true focus should be what's the board. So I start with the board and what the business priorities are and be really aligned to that, and then measure myself and speak in that language. Yeah, there's no point in my experience talking procurement speak to a board that speaks another language. Yeah, you've got to speak in business terms, business priorities, and really allow the organization to partner with you to be able to enable that growth or that change. Yeah, so that's very much the tangible edge of that relationship. What I've tried to create transparency on just spend, for example, which is often the case, especially in the current climate. That is a siloed data point that reinforces siloed mindset or legacy think around what procurement really unlocks. And if you apply that sort of lens to recent geopolitical and macro challenges, then actually the board thinks of procurement as a very different lever to pull. Yeah. If you think through COVID, how did you keep the business going, connect people? If you think about today, then you think about supply chain and de-risking. It's business resilience and business growth through the adoption of new tech, new ways of doing things in new locations, tapping into new talent in your workforce design. What's the synergy between companies you could acquire or be part of? They're all dimensions of modern procurement. So I very much start with that as a first brick and speak in those business chains so you can articulate the so what of the value.
This podcast is in partnership with Amazon Business. Amazon Business is your one-stop destination for everything your organization needs. Think of it as the Amazon you already know and love, but specifically re-engineered for the way you work. Amazon Business gives you access to business-only pricing on millions of items and quantity discounts that scale with your growth. It's about spending less time bogged down in those manual tasks and more time on what really matters. So head over to Amazon Business and make the power of Amazon work for you.
I think speaking to procurement leaders like yourself, it's clear that within the kind of procurement function, it operates kind of wholly across all departments, that it isn't a surprise that you talk about this kind of, procurement speak, because you are across so many facets of a company and involved in so much of it. For you, how do you see the best way of breaking down those barriers? Because, so often not procurement is kind of seen as this kind of, like you mentioned, siloed department, very much the naysayers, the people who say no, the people who just go and spend. How about do you go breaking that kind of that perceived view of procurement, should we say?
Look, first thing to say, it's not an overnight thing. You've got to be realistic. Hence me trying to calibrate the pace of the business change that you can take. It's how you articulate it, in my experience. So some people view procurement as a legacy, as I said, in a vertical sense. Where I've seen success is viewing it as one of the privileged horizontals. You're a connector, enabler. You've got a line of sight across the whole business to provide that transparency on left and right hand of how you can leverage existing or create something new if you think differently, and innovatively about a partnership, a relationship, a location, a capability. That's where you bring a different value add lens. The method also needs to stay in step with that. So that's the internal voice, because there isn't a regulator out there who isn't looking at what an organization is doing with a third party, and you own that, right? If you then also think about sustainability, so doing it with a conscience, then you own that as well. So if you get one of those two things wrong, then the business and brand is going to be impacted. So it's for you to learn and speak the language of your business and your sector, to be able to articulate the value you bring or the tools you need in your toolbox to enable that to be successful.
Yeah. Now, you've obviously been in procurement for a little while. You've obviously got your background, where you've kind of worked in the kind of intersection between kind of a CIO, a CISO, and a CPO. You probably see AI differently than most other people. Do you think there's a gap between the AI hype, which is being sold by vendors, and the actual material, tangible results that you've delivered on the bottom line?
That almost sounds like a leading question, Aaron. But but look,
Never thought
I've been privileged to work with some really visionary tech leaders in different sectors, and because my background started with tech and data, there's some common ground, but I wouldn't profess to say that I'm a tech expert. But in it, being able to connect with them and speak in relatable terms across different sectors, different geographies, and at different paces, it does give me, a slightly different lens, as you sort of recognised. I think the message is mixed, candidly, and I think it's sort of three-dimensional. I think the hype cycle around a vendor, what it brings, the material change is both positive but also full of uncertainty for a company. The readiness of the workforce of your organization to embrace it beyond the obvious productivity things that if you live in a data-rich organization, you have to crunch and make sense of, which is, by the way, one of the success factors of any procurement shop today, was bringing insight and innovation through the lens of the data, through what's written on the sheet, in a very geopolitical way, and then the business readiness for that. Right? Is the workforce really ready for that change? I think it's the intersection of all three of those is my learned experience in different sectors, and you can look at it as this is the worst it's going to be, and it's already adding value. and you can embrace it with guardrails. You can look at it as actually it's asking me too big a question around the business model, and you can overanalyze and then do nothing and be frozen. I lean towards experimenting, being fast learning, fast following as a hype cycle. I think that turns into more material, tangible results. There's loads of companies today who are doing use cases and seeing if it makes sense or doesn't make sense. That leans to me towards, I'm not sure where it's going to go, how much of business change it's going to embrace. Where do I place my money in terms of tomorrow's partner? Yeah, is also a parameter you have to consider. So yeah, I think it's a mixed message as it sits today. The other lens of that through what I've learned is, hence the CISO piece, is the value of information and the security of that. It's a real challenge because most AI-driven solutions want to learn. They want to learn with your data, and most companies are very protective of their data, rightly so. So how do you strike that balance? In some of the companies I've worked in, you invest in sanitized data. So in others, they don't have that capability or the luxury of doing that or the maturity of doing that. So what do you do, right? So that's where I think the mixed message and the hype comes in, and the fear of someone else getting it right and then you're obsolete is all part of that mix. So, I don't think there is a sector today where the intersection of a CPO with the CIO and the CISO isn't relevant to how the company is going to survive today but thrive tomorrow.
Obviously, this is such a fundamental shift in the way that people work. AI is just not only affecting the way that procurement works; it's affecting kind of industries across the world. As someone who leads teams during times where there is a lot of kind of mixed emotions when it comes to procurement, like you said, there's hesitancy, there's excitement. How do you kind of best lead a team through such a ongoing change like that? Is it a case where there's kind of like a broad message for all? Is it a case where you have to kind of talk to your team one-on-one? Just kind of take me inside leading the team through such a shift.
Yeah, it very much lends itself to what I started our conversation with, was the pace of the business change. Yeah, and the function of the human in the loop is one phrase, but this is not about replacement. This is about addition, yeah, and acceleration, and that's very much what you would learn to keep your skills fresh and match fit. Yeah, whatever your role is today, to think different, to have a different lens, to be a trusted, valued member of a team, to add value with what you bring to the table. That's very much part of the narrative that I wrap it around. And it's genuine, right? It has to be authentic, because people with skill and experience will sniff that out a mile away. So that's very, very aligned. If they are great at what they do, then they'll embrace it and have that natural character to go, okay, that can enable me to be better at my job. And that's another part of that equation. It's not being done to you is a really important guardrail that I keep front of mind. It's part of our toolkit. Yeah. We live in a data-driven world. Let's accelerate that element, yeah, and see where that can take us, yeah. And that experimentation really drives through with safe guardrails and transparency. Really allows the team and you to stay humble, acknowledge where it's fallen over or its shortcomings, and figure out what the path needs to be to the next stage of that journey.
Thank you. I think it's so interesting to kind of hear from the leaders and how they go about kind of working day to day in managing a team, because I think there's so much that goes behind, you're not only managing kind of billions in spend, there's also, the people that help power your team. I also imagine a lot of people are very interested in getting your insight and advice. So I was wondering, for the kind of tomorrow leaders, which are you mentoring today, what's the kind of one piece you'd give them about maintaining human integrity and strategic focus when they're kind of dealing with the numbers that you have during your career, the billions in spend?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, because as I mentor fellow leaders in this space, and fintechs and insurtechs and procure-techs, they're always trying to solve a problem. I think there's two parts to what I would say. There isn't a silver bullet. Yeah, you're going to get it wrong, but learn from getting it wrong, right? Focus on alignment. So it very much is all the way through the organization. What does alignment mean? So are you really, and challenge yourself, are you really focused on the right priorities for the business? Yeah. Being what I term a negotiation hero isn't necessarily the priority of the company, but it will reinforce a legacy mindset of what your function can do. And others will then think more strategically, and then you'll execute the negotiation because you're the hero for that. So focus on alignment on the business priorities. In some companies, that won't be necessarily just cost save. It'd be an and equation. Yeah. But you've got to really take the temperature of what that means for your organization. It could be breaking into a new territory and aligning to de-risk, with a regulator. TPRM is a big focus at the minute. It could be find me tomorrow's growth partner because we want to invent new products. That means find me the next generation of providers, and discover those. It could be find me value alignment through simplification or M&A, or it could be I want to have, find me tomorrow's workforce talent pool in a new location and a delivery site, a delivery hub. So if you're not aligned on the priorities, then you'll never be able to convince the decision maker at the boardroom to invest in what you need to be successful to do it.
You've described yourself as a visionary and curious thinker. In an increasingly automated, data-driven environment, what is the one human skill you believe is completely unoutsourceable and essential for the future of the C-suite?
I think there will be more and more investment in character and human EQ qualities. And if you think about the characteristics of any leader or successful procurement function, then they always understand and build strong relationships, have integrity, are credible, and execute brilliantly. So I think the human elements of it are unoutsourceable. And that for me means trust your judgment. You're involved in the business of procurement. I really do see it as the business of procurement. And part of that has to be fantastic judgment, data-driven judgment, but still in the end, human-based judgment. So you've got to trust your judgment. I would say don't fall into a trap of over-analyzing something. Experiment, learn quick, don't make the same mistake twice, and move forward, because the business is thinking and executing in that way. And if you're sitting there working in a traditional way, you're going to be out of step and just generate frustration in the organization. So don't overanalyze, trust your judgment, and execute what you know is right. And at all times, really invest in effective business aligned or stakeholder aligned communication. Don't just fall into a trap of speaking procurement. You can do that inside, but that's not going to reap dividends with your stakeholders and the board if you really want to affect a change in the organization.
Yeah, I think kind of what we listening to the message you're sending is like that whole don't speak procurement we've got to do is the case of we have to present the way that we operate in business terms in sense that makes, that the wider business can understand. And, it's really insightful to hear from a leader such as yourself who's managed with so much spend that, that's kind of a core function that needs to be done. I could honestly sit here and speak to you all day and pick your brains about leadership, but unfortunately we are running out of time. Something we like to do on the podcast is we like to get leaders to ask questions to one another. So this is kind of a lot different than we've had before. A lot of the questions have been, about risks and what's keeping them up at night. But my question to you comes from Peter Sharoff, who was on the podcast last week, and he wants to know what's the funniest thing that's happened to you during your time in procurement.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but during COVID, I was presenting to a board, and I was at home, obviously, and I got a knock on the door, because you did, and you get deliveries. I thought I'd muted, there's a worldwide board. I thought I'd muted my mic, went to have a chat with the postie at the front door, came back to join the board, and I hadn't muted it. And the whole board was just fascinated by what I'd got delivered. And we spent the next 10 minutes taking the mickey out of me, which was very humanizing for all concerned, but deeply embarrassing as well.
Will you disclose to us what you got delivered, or do you not want to relive that?
No, I've burnt it. It doesn't exist anymore. But I think the positive spin on that is it just revealed how human everyone is, right? So you'd have some people would have a dog or a cat just leap up on something, a child would turn up. I didn't turn the mic off and we had a good chat. Now they know my postie.
Well, I think, like you said, that was probably quite needed, that when we were working through the pandemic and taking all our meetings over Zoom, it was almost very, it must have been so alien to so many people who've been working and, used to that personal relationships, being in a room all together and standing in front. So it must have always, in a way, been, like you said, nice to kind of almost break the ice and, connect on that human level at a time where, I think people were desperate for that kind of connection, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And it's really challenging, right? You build trust with all those human things we just talked about in person, and then you take it from there, right? And to try and do all of that in a hybrid way, or actually just in a remote way, and make those types of big calls is challenging. You've got to admit that. And it takes a lot of toll on many people to get that right. So having those release valves, puts a smile back on your face, gives you perspective, and then you keep going.
Yeah, I think that kind of essence is even more important for today. We're all under so much stress and pressure to deliver on our roles, but to have those kind of moments of release, whether it be, laughing with teammates or, maybe going out for a meal or a drink, after a hard week. I think, those are imperative for a business to find success within its team. But, I'm going to give you the opportunity now to, we won't exactly be able to have your revenge on Peter, but on our next speaker, what would you like to put to them?
I think what you just said really resonates strongly with me in terms of consciously investing in the human side of the team dynamic, the people dynamic, wherever they are. So my question for the next speaker would be, how do you acknowledge and celebrate the small wins, for yourself, but also within your professional life?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice question. You probably, easily have a whole podcast exploring that topic of celebrating wins. So that's great. Well, and then thank you so much for your time. Before we let you go, we've got our quick fire questions. So I've got 3 questions for you here. I just want you to say the first thing that comes to mind. Don't think about it.
Okay.
So the first question is, what's the most exciting thing about the future of procurement?
We're in the sweet spot of transforming businesses and finding our own voice. That's the most exciting thing for me for the future.
What is one thing people still get wrong about procurement?
The legacy mindset of managing a number, it just switches you away from so many opportunities about how you can partner and grow a business of tomorrow.
What does the procurement professional of the future look like?
Someone who's got great human qualities, as we touched on, is very data-driven, very strategic, and understands the business that they work in.
And finally, what is one piece of technology we rely on now, which will be obsolete in a year?
I think the keyboard, because we're going to replace stuff with voice.
I like the sound of that. I do. I dictating to write articles and reports sounds much nicer than hitting the wrong key over and over again.
Yeah, and if you think about where AI is, instead of you typing in, there's voice prompts left, right, and center. You're going to end up talking to someone. So I think the keyboard.
I like it. Well, again, I just want to thank you so much for your time today and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate you taking the time for us on Procurement Magazine Podcast.
Thanks, Aaron. Look, it's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed your questions and the conversation. So I hope it was useful for others who are listening to it.
Perfect. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Procurement Magazine Podcast. And we'll be back next time. We'll see you.